sand, what is clear now is that they're actually building a concrete canal. Right, so basically these guys are putting in the cast, the steel work for, morning guys. These guys are putting in the cast work for no, YouTube. These guys are putting in the cast ironwork for a concrete canal. This one that's at least is wider than what is being built elsewhere. So these guys are actually putting in a pretty wide canal, concrete canal with retaining walls, pretty high retaining walls. So you can get an idea of what this final project will look like. It's going to have some fairly wide canals, which is a relief because a lot of the canals that are being filled in with these narrow drains are using up the capacity for reserve water when it rains. And this is going to be tested in the rainy season. We get rainy season about 4 times a year. Well, two dries and 2 wet seasons, 2 rainy seasons a year. And sometimes it's so wet that you get floods. And eventually these drains that are being built are going to be tested. So the good thing about this drain is that it is wide. It is replacing what is in fact a wide canal. And people have been concerned that a lot of these wide canals are being filled in or being replaced by narrow drains. At least for the first time I can say this is an appropriately sized canal. But this is what is happening here on the East Coast Bypass Road. What they have done, so I see they started adding the street lights, right? So you can see the fixtures for the street lights have been added to this section. Just a few of them, maybe 6 of them or so. But this is what it looks like now on 29th day of March 2025. The East Coast Bypass Road. Yes, I think the Eccles end is more complete than this current state at the East Coast end. But there are parts along the 7 miles of East Coast Bypass Road that I guess are not quite complete. And we won't know that until I make the trip. There are parts of it that have been completed. And I don't know if you can actually drive all the way from Eccles to Ogle, but I know some cars are trying to do it. The reason why I know that you can't do it now is because the traffic coming out of Ogle here is not dense enough to account for the amount of traffic that would bypass it, would be using the bypass route. So this part of it, they've started to put in the retaining wall. You can see the retaining walls have been built in this section. It's a Saturday morning and these guys are actually working over. This is a fairly wide, I don't know if the video is capturing this, but it's a fairly wide canal. It's about, I would say, it's about 20 feet or about 7 meters wide. So about 20 feet wide. And It does uh, replace a much wider canal that was there before, because remember this was a very wide canal. They've had to fill in some of it to gain all of this real estate for the road to build these lanes. But they've managed to keep a fair amount of the width of the canal, 20 feet, and it's fairly deep. It's probably going to be a little deeper than it was in terms of capacity originally. Now, of course, these guys are probably Cuban or tell me something. You guys from Cuba or Venezuela? Cuba or Venezuela? Cuba. Okay. So a lot of these guys are Spanish speaking, but they're from Cuba. Some people are asking whether, in fact, the workers we were passing were from Venezuela. Some of them are, but most of these guys who are working on the canal system are from Cuba, as one of them just said, Cuba. Guyana and Cuba have a strong diplomatic relations, and Cubans have been able to work in Guyana, to travel to Guyana without visas, visa-free. And that has become an issue right now because the US government has changed its stance, is becoming a lot more closed, and have cracked down on Cuban migrants and migrants from all over the world, but particularly from Latin America and Cuba. And they have been starting to lean on Guyana and the Caribbean to expel Cuban nationals. But Guyana and the Caribbean are part of the CARICOM, and Cuba is now part of CARICOM, Caribbean community. Cuba is a Caribbean country and part of CARICOM, and so Guyana is obligated, because of its arrangements, its agreements with the CARICOM community, to have Cuban nationals working and traveling to Guyana. And we actually have to stand up to the changing American foreign policy, because you can't just abandon your allies just because America has changed its government. You know, CARICOM has to be a much more stable community than that. But this is what is happening here, guys. This is what the canal system here on the East Coast Bypass Road looks like. And this is what the canal system looks like here on the East Coast. You can see the retaining walls have been built in this section, and they're still working on the rest of the canal system. So a fairly large part of this East Coast Bypass Road still has to be completed. You can see straight ahead, that's the AC Marriott Hotel. AC Marriott Hotel is also close to completion, and further up the road, that white building is the new maternity hospital, and opposite maternity hospital, that is the ExxonMobil has their headquarters. But we are now approaching Ogle Airport. This is the Ogle, that's Ogle Airport as seen from the new East Coast Bypass Road. It is a small airport, small regional airport. There are international flights, but not large not for large aircrafts. This fence, this is the perimeter of the airport. That's airport property. A sign now that says airport property. Hey, this is actually quite new. That sign that says airport property is actually quite new. And the runway is straight ahead in that direction. It's the airport runway. And so traffic is allowed to use this road, this part of the road, only because the airport needs to remain operational. This road is not yet open for use, as you can see. This section now has asphalt. So from this point on, it seems as if they have managed to complete the road surface. They've laid down asphalt, but the road is by no means complete. As you can see, the median is still to be completed. They have put in the wires, electrical wires for street lights. So the street lights, I guess, have to be installed here in the median. And they've also put in the light poles, lamp poles in the median, in parts of the median further up in the distance. So what is happening here at the East Coast Bypass Road? I would say it's further along now than it was the last time we were here. I'm not so sure. They actually filled in this canal all the way up to this point. So I'm assuming they're probably going to do the same. They're going to have to build a canal system, extend it all the way along this point, because they've actually filled in a fair amount of the canal with that sand, and they're actually going to have to dig it out again and put in the concrete canal to retain the catchment, the water catchment. They're probably going to have to do it on both sides too, because you can't just fill in all these canals in what used to be a floodplain for sugar cane. Hopefully somebody's paying attention to that, and that they will in fact reverse a lot of this filling in of the canals. But this is what is happening here in this neck of the woods. The East Coast Bypass Road is actually being built by the Indian contractors, and therefore you'll be able to compare eventually driving on the surface of this road with driving on Heroes Highway and on the coast to see who does it best, whether it be Chinese, the Indians, or the Guyanese. We know the Guyanese are building concussion roads, according to the US Secretary of State, and nobody would disagree with that, because local people have been complaining about that road surface for as long as it has existed. Since it opened about 2 or 3 years ago, people have complained that the surface is uneven, it's bumpy, it's rough. But of course, nobody listens. Like I said, whenever I talk about mediocrity, people on this channel, the government supporters, will always tell you about Burnham this and Granger that.